The Harris School is a policy school forged in the traditions of the University of Chicago of rigorous inquiry, of bringing evidence to bear, of using reasoning to trump ideology. And this is an occasion to celebrate everything that the Harris School stands for and everything that it's become. We have a really full afternoon of programming, starting with some wonderful panels here, and then breakout sessions, and then a return for the formal dedication of the school. You'll have a chance to hear from Harris faculty, from policy leaders, from distinguished guests, from practitioners, tackling issues such as fighting poverty and inequality, confronting the global energy challenge, strengthening democracy and institutions, the leading issues of our day. And as I've heard more than one person say today, there's no better place to be addressing those issues than the University of Chicago Harris School of Public Policy. So I am going to transition us very quickly, because at the Harris School we run on time and under budget. And we're going to move right away to our opening session, which is the state of democracy. There are going to be 2 panel talks, and I'm going to moderate the first one, and then we're going to transition quickly to the second one. So with that, I'd like to welcome to the stage where is Arne? There you are. Former U.S. Secretary of Education Arne Duncan, and renowned artist, senior advisor at Harris Theaster Gates, and we're going to talk about inequality and opportunity in America. Please join me on the stage. So there's an increasing appreciation in the U.S. and across the world of the importance of bridging silos in addressing policy challenges, from disparities in income and opportunity to global conflict. Each of you has worked to improve outcomes here in Chicago by bridging silos, whether it's between opportunities for employment and violence, whether it's the arts and economic opportunity. You've been able to work with the community to try to bring new solutions to bear. So I'd like to just start off with some context. Theaster, tell us a bit more about your current projects and your work with Rebuild.
Sure. So I spend a lot of time thinking about art, and in that way, maybe considering beauty. When I moved to 69th and Dorchester, this kind of neighborhood just south of here, it was evident that the resource, the vitality, opportunity that existed 10 blocks away didn't exist a little bit further south. And so first I just started building small projects to try to highlight the possibility in the neighborhood. Then I found myself building buildings, acting as a kind of advocate for change. And so rather than kind of a lot of complaints, I just kind of got a couple extra hammers and found myself rebuilding about 80 units of housing, building a cultural space on Stony Island. And that work has become kind of a resonator for the possibility of transformation that helps to stabilize folk that live there, and also maybe make new opportunities for beauty.
And tell us a little bit about CRED, Arne.
This is a good balanced panel, because Theaster started saying he spends a lot of time thinking about art. I spend no time thinking about art. I need to spend more time.
The Harris School, bringing people
Exactly.
together.
No, it's so art and beauty, I don't say this like, it's so critically important, but for me, for our family coming back to Chicago in 2016, seeing the level of violence at just crisis proportions, for me, the city gave me everything, academically, socially, culturally, educationally. Grew up here, and my dad taught here for 40 years. This is home base. It didn't seem right, and it didn't seem fair. So we're working with the young men. 15 neighborhoods produce 80% of the violence. Unfortunately, basically 85% of those shooting and being shot are young black men, 17 and 24. So we're working directly with those young men, most likely to shoot and be shot, helping them transition from the illegal economy to the legal economy. I say all the time, I tell you a million stories, but our men are the solution. They are not the problem. We have to walk with them. We have to learn from them. We have to partner with them. But they're going to lead Chicago to a much safer place.
And education's actually played an important role in both of your trajectories. You got your start in education here in Chicago, yes?
Yeah, I think in some ways it became really clear at middle school that there were these moments where my middle school experience being bused up north started to differ from the brothers on the west side whose middle schools were local. And I think there's a way in which that moment at 5th grade where the expectations, we were already talking about college at 5th grade, that the expectations around my life from my family, but also the safety nets at Lane Tech, there were all these things that were starting to happen that the day-to-day conversations between me and my homies on the block started to differ more and more and more every year, right? So that by the time we got to high school, their lives seemed faster than mine, more interesting. They had cooler friends. And then there was a shift when it felt like opportunity started to dip for them and they kept growing for me. And that created also this pit in my gut. Like, there was nothing that was different between me and my homies. It was really, in fact, they were often smarter than me. I was like, Mark, you can't do your math so fast. But the opportunity gap started to increase as our education opportunities started to shift.
So Chicago, there's been studies of the educational gaps in Chicago that start early in students' lives. One study suggested that in Chicago, black students are 3 grades behind white students in terms of effective education. Are there specific changes, Arne, you'd want to advocate in the education system here in Chicago?
Lots of changes, and made some of them when I ran the system for 7 years. But I think not just Chicago, but as a nation, the idea of a one-size-fits-all mentality doesn't work. So I'll always start with pre-K. It's the best investment we can make. James Heckman here, Nobel Prize-winning economist, has demonstrated over and over a 7-to-1 ROI. So the fact that across the country we have millions of kids start kindergarten a year to 18 months behind every year, and somehow that's okay, and the dirty secret in education is often those kids don't catch up. So those are kids that eventually drop out and struggle. Those are Theaster's friends. So that for me is a starting point. The second thing is what's always been constant in education is time. A school day, 8 to 2:30 or 9 to 3:30. Some kids need 6 or 8 hours a day of education. Some might need 10. Some might need 12. I always think what works for the rich probably works for the poor. When I went away to college on the East Coast, found out a bunch of my new classmates went to boarding schools. Why don't we have boarding schools for kids whose homes are, where they're really struggling? So some kids need 24/7. We fed tens of thousands of kids 3 meals a day. We sent a couple thousand kids home each Friday afternoon very discreetly with a backpack full of food because we worried about them not eating over the weekend. So thinking about what's the right dosage, what's the right amount of education for each kid, and having that be not the constant, but the variable. That's the step as a nation we haven't taken.
So how do you tailor education to the needs of the specific student in a system that's as big as Chicago's or LA or New York when resources are scarce and lots of programs tend to be systemic?
Yeah, so the tailoring is actually relatively easy. This is just a simple conversation with young people and their parents. The challenge, as you said, is the resources. So it costs more money to have a kid go to school 12 hours a day than 6 hours a day. It costs 2 to 3 times the amount to have them go 24/7 and have a residential setting. But we either make those investments early, which for me are sort of peanuts, or we lock people back up, lock them up at the back end. And I spend a decent amount of time in Cook County Jail. That's about $60,000 a bed per year. I'd much rather spend a little bit more on education at the front end.
And Theaster, what role do the arts play in enriching students' lives in a way that promotes their lifelong economic mobility and well-being?
Well, I just wanted to kind of share with Arne that there's a way in which so much of the work is about listening, and kind of having to first believe that all young people matter. And I'm not quite sure, in order to be willing to make the investments that we'd make, we first have to believe that kids of color matter. And I think that there's also, it's hard to talk about the education gap without talking about race and social gaps. And so I think there's one part of this that the arts becomes a way in which you have a moment to listen, and it's not about calculus or it's not about geometry. It's not about whether or not you said something right. It's a chance for a person to be human and excel with the things that they feel inclined with, And then out of that relationship, other kinds of motivation, encouragement, mentorship, some of those things could happen. And so I spend a fair amount of time just in conversation while making and saying like, oh, well, what do you want to do with your life? Oh, well, did you know that this thing happened? And that those moments that are like not putting a young person on blast, not telling them how bad they are, but saying, man, you're really good at this thing. You're really good doing these things, and there's more, you know.
Just to quickly add, for me, it's just like, 3 o'clock to 7 o'clock, 3 o'clock to 8 o'clock, dance, drama, music, theater, debate, academic decathlon, chess, sports. Every kid needs a reason to be excited about going to school. Every kid has a different passion. So for him, it was art. For me, it was basketball. It doesn't matter. But you have to give kids a reason to want to get up and go to school on a freezing January day in Chicago. Those after-school hours and having that access to a wide variety of wide menu, a wide variety of activities, and let kids figure out what their passion is, what's their interest, what's their genius. That's life transforming.
So the work that you described in sitting with kids as you're letting them create and enabling that, and the work that you do with CRED, they both seem really intensive, both in terms of resources, but also in terms of attention and time. Those have, I think, both worked incredibly well on the scale that you're implementing them. Do they scale? Is this something that we can expect to replicate and to be able to be implemented citywide?
So we started with 30 guys in Roseland in the fall of 2016, so we've been at it for about 2.5 years. We both do the work and fund the work, so it's a little confusing sometimes to people. Along with our other partners, we're working with 500 men now, so we are scaling as fast as we can. People always say, how do you find guys? We have a waiting list for everything we're doing. Guys are not winning on the street. They're not getting rich. They're getting shot. The police are chasing them. They're looking for paths out. So we are trying to scale as fast as we can while maintaining quality and not increasing our guys' risk. And we spend a huge amount of time worrying about our guys' safety. And so that's always first and foremost. But it is scalable. And as a city, we have had one strategy. We have had a lock 'em up strategy, an arrest strategy. And in fact, we do that extraordinarily poorly. I don't have the 2018 data, but in 2017, if you committed homicide in Chicago, some kind of clear rate, what percent of crimes get solved. In 2017, less than 80%, less than 20% of those crimes, homicides, got solved. So you had about an 83% chance of literally getting away with murder. If you just shot somebody and didn't kill them, that has about a 4 to 5% clear rate. So 95% chance of getting away from that. So there is that relationship with the police is largely broken structurally. We have to give guys a reason to put down the guns. We have to give them some hope. And they are choosing that time and time and time again.
I think if I were to use the word scale, it would be slightly different. My goal wasn't to transform every community in America myself, but my hope was that there could be a way that the ideological framework, if people could start to believe that their talent, with their effort, with local resource, with neighbors, with partners, that effort could actually resurrect a place that's been somewhat downtrodden, and that beauty could then lead to other kinds of investments, could lead to new educational opportunities, new healthcare opportunities, that I wanted to kind of pilot that work and then kind of allow other people in their neighborhoods to then kind of figure out what is their local genius, what are the things that they're excited about, what's the local building types and land types and economic opportunities that would allow for new drivers to well up and kind of go from bottom up instead of top down, and that everyday people have the ability to change their communities. And so I think I've found through a couple different ways that around the country, people are super excited about the value that arts and culture plays in the redevelopment and transformation of poor neighborhoods.
So you've both mentioned neighborhoods and communities, and as a relative newcomer to Chicago, I was really struck that it's a city of neighborhoods where neighborhoods have very different population needs, characteristics, cultures. Are there partnerships that have been particularly important to you in doing your work? How do you work within different neighborhoods, and what can academics and government and private enterprise do in partnership? What are the most important partnerships you've relied on?
I think the part that's painful for me is Chicago's not a tale of two cities. Chicago's a tale of 10 or 15 or 20 cities. And Hyde Park, where we are and where I grew up, and I live 2 blocks from where I grew up, Hyde Park is gorgeous, Lincoln Park is gorgeous. I have an office downtown. Downtown is booming. But you go, 3 miles south or a couple blocks south, or you go, a couple miles west, and our guys are living in war zones. And somehow we in rooms like this have been far too comfortable, far too accepting of that disparity. And until we start to not be okay with that, you'll continue to see these massive disparities in educational outcomes, in income, in death, in violence. And Chicago, which is one of the most segregated cities in the nation, this absolutely ties to race. And you have to talk about that. And until we believe, Theaster said it perfectly, until we believe there's genius everywhere, Theaster's amazing, inspirational. I don't think he's unique. I think there are lots of Theaster gates around this city who don't quite have a break and go to Lane Tech, and we lose that talent, we lose that genius. And so until we believe, until we become uncomfortable, until we become dissatisfied with the massive inequities and opportunity, our city will continue to struggle.
Yeah, in some ways it feels like there has to be a new kind of social friendship that starts to develop between people who absolutely have no reason to get to know each other. And so when the housing developer that really understands the nature of housing policy and how to do bricks and mortar becomes friends with people who live in neighborhoods that are struggling, and that when they walk through the 22-unit building, not because they want to acquire it, but because they want to have a passion for the possible restoration or transformation of a place, you find that there's amazing excellence that's only concerned about the market, and then there's amazing talent that has no access to opportunity. And I wish that those potential political allies, social allies, could get to know each other enough so that the developer who's concerned about violence and the brother who needs a job would get to know each other and become friends, become allies. I think that at that moment we would start to see another kind of transformation that is not just policy-based. I could tell you other things about policy, but I think that there's a need for new kinds of relationships, new relationship forms to start to develop.
So how do we do that?
I'll just give a couple quick examples of what we've done, and we're making lots of mistakes every day in learning, but we had one, I don't even call them gangs, this one clique that the entire group decided to put down the guns and come work with us. And in that area that had frankly, dozens of bodies dropped, there hasn't been a single shooting in like 15 months. I asked those guys, what can we do to say thank you? Took a little bit of risk. I didn't, give me a car, give me whatever. They said, could you help build us a playground? That our kids have no place to play. And so we built a playground. We had 200 volunteers. We had people from the neighborhood. We had people from downtown come down. Everyone worked really hard, and we literally built a playground in a day. And those kinds of relationships of sweating together, carrying mulch together, raking together, constructing together, that's really powerful. Our whole thing is we think we're solving an economic problem, not a crime problem. We have guys work with us for a year to 18 months, and we transition them to the legal economy. We have about 4 dozen employers who are hiring our guys at the back end. Our guys, it's a different talent pool, but our guys know customer service. They've been CEOs on the street. They know lots of things. They are absolutely motivated and resilient. We have a couple guys working in law firms. We have a guy working at Deloitte. These are guys with, frankly, violent felony backgrounds. 2 of them just celebrated their first-year anniversaries. They're doing amazing. The police chief can't solve this by himself. The police have a role. If we had more CEOs hiring at the back end, the final thing I'll say is that everybody's carrying guns because nobody's safe. But the vast majority of our guys carry guns. We call it, they play defense, defensively. They're not trying to hurt someone. They're just trying not to get killed. We have a small number of what we call active shooters in Chicago. That's who we're working with. If we could just get to those active shooters, which isn't that many, we would see a precipitous drop in violence. We saw a 15% reduction in 2017, 15% in 2018. We're making progress. We have a long way to go. If we could get to 2,000, 2,500, 3,000 jobs for these guys with wraparound services, I think we would see a fantastic drop. And again, a city of our wealth and resources and civic community and corporate community and philanthropy, if we can't think about 2,000, 3,000 jobs, shame on us.
And what do you think brought that group to you in the first place? What made them put down their guns and say, we're signing on?
We were working out in that neighborhood for a while. We knew they were perpetuating a lot of the violence, and we couldn't quite get to them. They basically just watched us for a year and finally decided we were for real. And sat down and had some, I'll say intense, not tense conversations. And we built trust, and I said, my reputation's on the line, and their leader said, my reputation's on the line, and let's try and figure this thing out. Part of what brought him to me is he was taking his child to child care in the rival territory, so he was armed every single day. The other leader of the group they were into it with was taking his child to his neighborhood, armed to the hilt. He said, this makes no sense. This violence is all very, very geographically tight. And what he didn't tell me, but he told me later, was they were actually doing contract shooting for other groups across the city. So it wasn't just in their neighborhood. They were making money by doing hits in other places. What brought him was his fatigue, his believing that we were honest and we would follow through, and him wanting his child to grow up safe. And I'll give him he went unarmed, walked over to the rival, lifted up his coat, showed him no guns, could have been shot dead right there, and said, let's talk. He brokered that peace, that treaty. We had nothing to do with that.
Yeah, I mean, I really want to just kind of think about Arne as a bridge. If we were to think about somebody who has a high understanding of large-scale administration, an understanding of policy, then add resource and a heart for people, that then becomes pretty significant change. And I imagine that lots of us in this room will have access to resources, knowledge of policy, an understanding of how systems work or don't work, and the ability to kind of operationalize ideas. The part that seems to be missing often is a passion for the people. And I feel like, in a way, you can't force a person to be passionate or mission-driven, and I hope that there's a way in which the Harris School, this work, could start to make more people feel passionately about the things just outside of their personal homes.
So you've worked in city planning. Arne, you've worked from the Chicago Public Schools up to the Department of Education. What do you think the most exciting policy opportunities are at different levels of government? Is it really not working with government right now, and social entrepreneurship and social ventures hold the greatest promise? What's government doing well right now, and what would you like to see different?
Well, I think at a local level, there's always this kind of desire to see the number of minority contractors and owners of varying kinds of manufacturing or service things grow. There's plenty of opportunity, there are plenty of people, but there's a gap between the two. And so I think that if we could put a finger on or an opportunity on figuring out how to get us from the resource opportunity to those that could potentially be the pipeline for filling that opportunity, we would have something really amazing. And I think that our city and state government is super interested and invested in that. Sometimes how to operationalize that is really difficult.
I'm always honest. Obviously, I was a lot more optimistic at the federal level a couple years ago than I am today. So this is an extraordinarily challenging time for the country, and I honestly never thought we would be here, and you don't know how this movie ends. Having said that, whether it's education, whether it's arts, whether it's after school, whether it's pre-K, for me, these are, yes, they cost money, but these are investments. They're not expenses, they're investments, and they're not just the financial, but the social dividends pay off at an extraordinary level. Just, the United States on pre-K, which I'm always talk about, ranks about 28th, 29th internationally. We should be ashamed of our record relative to other countries. And somehow we don't value our 3- and 4-year-olds enough. We don't have mass shootings in other countries. We have them here on a daily basis. Why? Because we value our guns more than we value our kids in the United States. And there's a toll that we pay every single day. So for me, some of these things are hard, but they're not rocket science. We need great policy, but what we lack is courage. What we lack is political will. What we lack is a belief that black and brown kids and poor kids and kids in Appalachia have extraordinary talent. And so the challenge for me is, yes, policy-wise, but it's honestly, it's an aspiration, it's a cultural belief that these are assets, that these young people, our country needs their talents. They're not the threat. And that, for me, is the fundamental disconnect that's, I think, hurting our country in some pretty significant ways.
So as a last question to you both, we have an incoming new mayor with an opportunity to think about a whole range of programs. If you could give incoming Mayor Lightfoot some advice about things you think would be the programs to prioritize, or things you think aren't working so well that you would advocate pivoting away from, or a general approach that you want to be sure she keeps in mind, what would be your advice to her?
Well, first I was pretty impressed that a month and a half immediately after winning the election, she was immediately putting together committees in health and education and culture and saying, people, please tell me what I can do in the first 100 days to be exceptional. And I think that being a part of some of those brainstorming workshops, I felt really heartened that she was immediately not just setting her own agenda, but was really asking people who had a deep knowledge of how the city works, where the challenges are, where the sore spots are. She was already asking well in advance of her office work to kind of, good advice from good people. So that was heartening. I also now really believe that our leadership is only as effective as its citizens. And so I can't put the problem on Mayor Lightfoot or Mayor Rahm. I really have to believe that I'm part of the problem or the solution. So to the extent that we could take a mayor who has not had the same experience of like running cities, what can we give her as a collective will and as a collective consciousness to make sure that she does well? So her success is going to be dependent upon us.
She and I are sitting down Monday, so we'll have this conversation and see how it goes. But
preview it for us.
Yeah, well, I couldn't be more pleased to see her leadership and very different mindset, very different background, and the city was looking for change, and I think that's really good. Obviously, I'm just obsessed with this issue of violence right now, so I'll say what we have, again, my personal opinion, people can disagree, is we have lacked a goal for violence reduction. So we've been very public saying we want to get homicides below 400 in this city. That's still way, way, way too high. We're 6 times more violent than New York, 3.5 times more violent than LA. We have not been below 400 homicides since 1965. That'd be a 54-year low. Then we got to keep going, but that would be a benchmark. I think our city has lacked the courage to have a goal. Once you have a goal, then you need some strategies to get to that goal. And we think, again, not just arresting everybody. I'm be clear, if people kill someone, I think they should be held accountable, but we got to keep giving guys a reason to put down the guns and do something different. So having a strategy to work with those who are most likely to shoot and be shot, and that profile is the same, we're doing this all through philanthropy. This is a public good. We need the city and the state to invest in these young men and help them transition from one world to the other. The policy is fine, the goals are fine, but I think what we both try and do is listen to young people. I'm in schools all the time on the South and West Sides. Every time I ask kids to raise their hands and say, how many of you know someone who's been killed? Literally, every hand goes up, every time. I then ask, how many of you know 5, 10, 15, 20 people have been killed? Often a third to half the hands go up. We have raised a generation of kids with a level of trauma and fear that most of us in this room will never know. And again, somehow that's become acceptable. Last story, and this one gutted me last week, a little girl on the West Side, we had a great conversation about a whole bunch of stuff, and I always apologize and say, we haven't done a good job of keeping you safe, and my goal is just to give kids their childhoods back, and I just want kids to be able to play outside, and I talk about playing basketball all over the city, and she sort of reacted physically to what I was saying. And I didn't quite know what she was thinking, so I said, just tell me what I'm saying, how's that making you feel? And she says, I can't go outside, so I watch other kids on YouTube play. And that just broke me. And that is pretty consistent, that our kids can't play outside. So my son watches YouTube videos of basketball players because that's his aspiration. She watches YouTube videos of kids playing because that's her aspiration. We need policy, we need goals, we need strategies, but we need to listen to kids, we need to listen to young men and have their wisdom guide us.
Well, this has been a truly stirring call to action, but also an inspiring opportunity for us to be part of the solution and think about how we can be good partners in all of this. I hope you'll all join me in thanking our inspiring guests.